It was still dawn when Maria woke up at the same time as always. The moonlight was still shining through the cracks in the curtains, and the sepulchral silence inside that immense mansion contrasted with the grandeur of the architecture and the luxurious objects that made it up. When she got up from her small bed in the room reserved for the servants, she carried with her a mixed feeling of duty and affection. For years, in that house, she had not only been a dedicated employee, but the maternal figure who had transformed an uncertain destiny into something tender and precious. Maria carefully changed into her impeccable uniform. She looked for a moment at the small scapula hanging around her neck, an object that gave her strength to face the hardships of everyday life. She walked lightly through the hallways, mentally checking off the first tasks of the morning, organizing the kitchen, preparing breakfast, making sure everything was ready before the boss woke up. However, there was a greater reason than the urgency of household chores. Maria's true motivation to start the day was not the work itself, but the fact that a child awaited her care. And not just any child, but Lucas, the son she had raised practically as if he were her own. When she reached the room that had once been the guest room, but had been Lucas's room for 5 years, she found the 5-year-old boy sleeping peacefully. His soft breathing reminded Maria that all the hardship was worth it. She admired the boy's innocent face for a few seconds, remembering how that bond had formed so abruptly and painfully. Feeling maternal affection blossom in her chest, she placed a soft kiss on the boy's forehead, wishing to herself that this peace would last forever. However, the ticking of the clock was unforgiving. She had to prepare the coffee early, organize the dining room, and ensure that everything was perfect for the household routine. After all, even though her boss Augusto barely had time for family meals, if you could call that structure a family, he was a methodical man and demanded that protocol be maintained. Augusto was a millionaire who had built his fortune at a dizzying pace, investing in high-risk businesses in the technology and finance sectors. His determination and, to a certain extent, the coldness in his decisions made him someone feared even by those who worked directly for him. For Maria, however, this was never an intimidating factor to the point of making her back away from her affection for Lucas. There were many secrets hidden in the long corridors of that mansion. When Maria went down the stairs, the sound of her footsteps echoed, and she remembered the story of how she had ended up there. At first, she worked for Cecilia, Augusto's former wife, who had become pregnant and needed full support with her chores, since her health was delicate. The salary was attractive, and the recommendations indicated that the couple, Augusto and Cecilia, had the resources to pay for anything they wanted. Maria then moved into the mansion, prepared to take care of the entire house and assist Cecilia in the last months of her pregnancy. However, what no one expected was the tragedy that would occur shortly after the birth. One cold morning, Cecilia had serious complications during the birth of Lucas. Even with the best medical care that money could buy, her life did not survive. And it was at that moment, wrapped up in his pain and possibly in his own inability to deal with grief, that Augusto practically left the baby aside. For those who knew him in business, that sounded inconceivable. After all, Augusto was known for his almost obsessive persistence, but reality showed that within the family environment, he preferred to avoid it. Cecilia's death hit him so hard that he could not bear to look at Lucas without remembering the loss. That was how Maria took on the child as if he were her own, while Augusto immersed himself in the demands of his companies. He said that money was no problem in raising the boy, and in fact, it was not. But love, presence and affection only existed through Maria's arms and heart. Remembering these memories, Maria would work on the stove, preparing a simple meal, but one that was prepared with dedication. She would arrange slices of bread, fresh fruit, and a chocolate drink that Lucas loved. She knew that after 7 in the morning, the boy would wake up hungry, and for him, the table would have to look like a banquet. For Augusto, however, the need was more aesthetic. It was essential that everything be in its place, although he rarely ate there. Maria would often prepare a tray to be taken to the office, where her boss spent most of his time. When she finished tidying up, she went upstairs again to gently wake Lucas. She slowly opened the curtains, letting the light enter the room. The boy stretched and blinked a few times before focusing his gaze on Maria. When he saw her, a smile immediately appeared on his face, filling the maid's heart with tenderness. "Good morning, my angel," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Good morning, Maria," Lucas replied, his voice still a little sleepy. That simple exchange of words was one of the sweetest moments of the day. Maria helped the boy get dressed, choosing a shirt with a bright print and comfortable shorts. While Lucas brushed his teeth, she watched him in the mirror, wondering if she would ever have the courage to tell the boy about the details of his birth and his father's lack of affection. For now, she preferred to allow him to cultivate an optimistic outlook. Although she knew that the truth would eventually come knocking, she held out hope that, by then, Augusto would be able to change his behavior and get closer to Lucas. Already in the kitchen, the boy devoured the toast and drank the chocolate milk, happy to start another day with Maria. Meanwhile, Augusto hurried down the stairs, wearing an elegant grey suit. He walked straight past, with his work folder in one hand and his cell phone in the other. "Good morning, Mr. Augusto," Maria ventured, her voice respectful. "Good morning," he replied automatically, without taking his eyes off his cell phone. "Leave the coffee ready. I'll have a sip in the office." Lucas looked up at his father, but Augusto didn't look back. The boy lowered his eyes, trying to hide the sadness that was emerging. Maria noticed and hurried to finish the tray. After handing the tray to the boss, she came back to find Lucas deep in thought. To distract him, she started talking about school activities, taking the boy to a safe place, emotionally speaking. And so the morning went on, without any major surprises, without any obvious joys, but also without any confrontations. What Maria didn't know was that, at that very moment, Augusto's office was the scene of a very serious concern. He was on the phone with his advisors, discussing a crisis that was taking hold in his business. There had been a risky investment, and now the return was being compromised by unexpected changes in the market. The tension that Augusto felt was reflected in his speech. "I want you to go over every clause in this contract," he said, gripping the phone tightly. "We need to find a loophole, or this is going to drag us down." On the other end, the advisor's voice sounded apprehensive but obedient. Augusto ended the call and remained silent for a while, looking at the cup of coffee on the table. 1,001 ideas for getting around the problem ran through his mind. Deals, mergers, selling assets. His pride wouldn't allow him to accept bankruptcy, but the reality of the bills was approaching, stubbornly. He took a deep breath and thought about Lucas. After all, he was his only heir. But that memory brought more pain than relief, because he had never built a real connection with the boy. Still, something inside him told him that he needed to take care of the child's future, even if it was just from a financial standpoint. That day, hours passed without Maria or Lucas hearing from Augusto. The boss went out for lunch, busy with meetings and more meetings. Maria, in turn, took the opportunity to teach Lucas how to make a small butter cookie in the kitchen. While the child tried to mix the dough, he laughed and spread flour on the counter, creating a sweet scene that warmed the heart of anyone nearby. That simplicity was what made their relationship so special. When night fell, Maria tucked Lucas into bed and told him a bedtime story. It was a superhero tale she had made up on the spot, but it was enough to make the boy laugh and look at him curiously. At the end, with Lucas already drowsy, she got up, turned off the light and left, closing the door carefully behind her. The routine was repeated every day, but there was a feeling of completeness in every detail she offered the boy. In Maria's thoughts, she was certain that although she was not Lucas's biological mother, the love she had for him was genuine. A few days later, Augusto called a meeting with his lawyer and an image consultant. He believed that perhaps by exploiting the narrative of a father who lost his wife and took care of his son alone, he could generate public commotion and attract investments or partnerships that would alleviate the financial crisis. However, for this to work, he needed to show the world a connection that did not exist in practice. The lawyer warned him that this could backfire if the truth were exposed. Augusto, however, was obsessed with the idea of rebuilding his company and maintaining his status. The corporate world loves stories of family overcoming, Augusto explained in a cold tone. If we know how to sell this emotional side, it could be the boost we need. The idea was to hold a large charity event with Lucas as the main symbol of a noble cause, possibly something related to orphaned or at-risk children. Augusto would hire photographers, press, and influencers. It would be a show aimed at the market, but sold as a humanitarian act. Maria only discovered this when she came across boxes full of posters and pamphlets in the service area. Among the boxes was a banner model that showed a photo of Lucas smiling, next to an emotional text inviting people to donate to a foundation that supports children. This made Maria feel so uncomfortable that she had to sit down. "My God, why is he doing this?" she murmured, already anticipating the whirlwind of worries that would come. The most disconcerting thing was to see Lucas's innocent expression there, as if he were a boy orphaned by everything, while Maria knew that yes, he had lost his biological mother, but he was not without love. She herself loved him unconditionally. Could it be that Augusto now wanted to take advantage of this tragedy for business gain? He needed to be sure before passing judgment. But the boss didn't give much opportunity for discussion. That same night, he gathered Maria, Lucas, and some of the house's employees in the main room and announced bluntly that a big event would take place there and that everyone should contribute to making it a success. Lucas, who knew nothing about advertising campaigns or marketing strategies, was excited, imagining it was some kind of fun party. Maria, on the other hand, looked worried, but she didn't confront Augusto at that moment. For her, the most important thing was to protect Lucas. Scenes popped into her mind, reporters, cameras, and strangers asking about the boy's story. How would this affect him? Would it raise questions he wasn't ready to ask yet? Maria still hoped to keep that secret, which his father had practically ignored at first, hidden until Lucas was able to accept it. In the days that followed, the mansion became a stage for frantic preparations. Trucks unloaded sound, lighting, and decoration equipment. A specialized team set up structures in the garden and in the large central hall. Beverage cabinets, luxurious tables, and floral arrangements appeared everywhere. It seemed more like a gala event than a charity event. Maria did her best to keep Lucas away from the chaos, taking him for walks in the park or helping him with his homework in his room. Even so, there was no escaping the onlookers and the intense movement that took over the place. The day before the event, a tailor arrived with special clothes for Lucas and Augusto, who would be the hosts of the evening. Maria, watching from afar, saw Augusto examining a very expensive tuxedo while asking the tailor to adjust some details on the boy's pants. Lucas was delighted with the outfit, but clearly did not understand what motivated all this production. A short time later, Maria was called to Augusto's office. Her heart raced. She did not know if she was about to be dismissed or if she would hear something even more disturbing. "Maria, I need you to keep Lucas in a good mood during the event. Make sure he's smiling for the photos and be nice to the guests. Don't let him say anything stupid or inappropriate, okay?" Augusto said with his characteristic coldness. "Yes, sir. I will do my best," she replied, containing her indignation. "Good. And dress appropriately. I don't want my son to be around someone who looks like a simple maid. I'll provide a dress for you as well. I need you to present yourself respectably for the occasion." Maria nodded, but it was impossible not to notice the pejorative way he referred to her maid's uniform. She left with a bittersweet feeling. On the one hand, perhaps having a nice outfit and being able to be close to Lucas was a positive thing. On the other hand, she felt used as if she were just another prop in Augusto's big show. On the big day, the mansion was unrecognizable. Bright lights illuminated the facade, reflecting off the marble columns and glass windows, while a red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the front door. Luxury cars arrived one after the other, and men and women in elegant attire paraded through the hallways, greeting each other with formal smiles. Maria kept Lucas by her side, carefully, so that he would not get lost in the sea of strangers. The dress she had been provided with was simple but elegant, and she felt strangely out of her usual role. Augusto was surrounded by important people, businessmen, political figures, and some famous people involved in social projects. Many came up to him to praise the initiative, and Augusto responded to each one with false modesty, as if all that action was the fruit of his caring and paternal heart. On several occasions, the cameras were positioned in front of him and Lucas. The boy, following Maria's recommendations, kept a polite smile, although he was clearly uncomfortable. He didn't even understand why there were so many photos. At one point, a journalist appeared and tried to interview Lucas directly, asking him things like, "What do you think about your father helping so many children?" Maria ran to intervene, but Augusto grabbed her arm, indicating that he wanted Lucas to answer. The boy became nervous, stuttered, and said, with the sincerity of a child, "My father doesn't spend much time with me, but I think that's really beautiful." The comment turned the spotlight on Augusto, and for a second he seemed unhinged. He tried to hide his discomfort by praising his son and pulling him into a fake hug, something so visibly staged that even the most condescending reporters looked at each other strangely. But since it was a charitable occasion, most of the tough questions were avoided. Those present were looking for an uplifting narrative and had no desire to unmask the millionaire host. Maria felt her chest tighten with each forced smile she saw on Lucas's lips. Among the guests, there were people with judgmental looks, and she noticed whispers about who the woman next to the boy could be. Some assumed she was an aunt or close relative. Others whispered that she might be some kind of guardian. No one even considered that Maria was the maid who had, in practice, raised the boy since birth. In the middle of the event, a foreign businessman, a major investor in technology, approached Augusto and began to congratulate him on his initiative in English. Maria, who did not speak the language, understood little, but noticed the expression of satisfaction on Augusto's face. Judging by the tone of his gestures and smiles, it seemed like they were closing a deal. The scene confirmed Maria's suspicions. The event was less about solidarity and more about attracting investors. She tried to contain her whirlwind of feelings, focusing on protecting Lucas, who at that point just wanted to go back to play with his teddy bear or sleep. At one point, there was an official inauguration ceremony for the supposed foundation to support children, created by Augusto. The millionaire went up on stage and gave a speech about the importance of caring for children who have no family, using vague and emotional examples. He mentioned, without naming names, the fact that he had lost his beloved wife in childbirth and had to care for his son alone, saying that he understands the pain of many children who feel like orphans. Maria listened from afar with a lump in her throat. Lucas, who was sitting in the front row, looked at Augusto with a mixture of admiration and strangeness. After all, he did not recognize in that distant man the affectionate father that his speech preached. When he finished speaking, Augusto invited Lucas to the stage and, amidst the applause, lifted the boy in his arms so that everyone could see this example of overcoming. But the moment Lucas looked at Maria, his eyes filled with tears, and the child could not contain a shy cry, which soon turned into sobs. He did not understand why he was being displayed like that. The audience reacted with some emotion, but for Maria, that scene was devastating. It broke her heart to see Lucas exposed like that, with flashes going off everywhere. After the brief commotion, the master of ceremonies announced that there would be a short cocktail break, and the guests began to disperse. Maria ran to take Lucas in her arms, comforting him. Meanwhile, Augusto followed behind, annoyed, reprimanding her for letting the child get out of control. "I told you to avoid this kind of scene. Where were you thinking?" Augusto shouted, looking at Maria with an air of superiority. "I'm sorry, sir, but he's just a child," Maria replied, almost in tears. "He doesn't know how to handle so much exposure. You better get used to it. This is his life, and you have to do your job." At that moment, Maria could no longer contain herself. Anger and hurt mixed together, and she decided to confront him firmly, yet discreetly. "My job is to take care of him and ensure his well-being, not to expose him like you are doing, as if he were a trophy." Augusto, enraged, opened his mouth to respond with something even harsher, but was interrupted by one of the investors who arrived asking to speak to him. He had to contain himself, leaving Maria with Lucas. The night came, and the event came to an end. Many guests left with the impression that the millionaire was a man with a noble heart, but behind the scenes, Maria and Lucas were living a personal drama. After the house fell silent, Maria put the boy to bed, singing a soft song to calm him. The child fell asleep in her arms, exhausted and emotionally drained. Maria, in turn, went to her room and let the tears flow, remembering Cecilia and how everything could have been different if Lucas's mother had been alive and if Augusto had had an ounce of true empathy for his own son. The following days were tense. Some of the press began to love the idea of turning Augusto into a sort of ambassador for underprivileged children. He gave a few interviews, always repeating the story that after his wife's death, he dedicated himself to raising his son with unconditional love, and that this love overflowed in his philanthropic actions. Maria had to fight her own indignation to maintain professionalism within the house, carrying out her duties. She would often slip away to Lucas's room and let the boy play in the garden, away from the news and gossip that was circulating. However, between meetings, interviews, and attempts to cover up the truth, Augusto was facing increasingly serious financial problems. The company was sinking into debt, and the new investments had not even arrived on time. One rainy afternoon, he called his lawyer and an advisor to discuss desperate measures. At the mansion, more specifically at the office, Augusto heard from the lawyer that the situation was on the verge of insolvency. He would need to start selling properties, including possibly the mansion itself. The millionaire's face contorted into an expression of fury and despair. "This is unacceptable. I've worked my whole life to achieve what I have. I can't lose it all now," he shouted, banging his fist on the table. The lawyer tried to calm him down, but he brought up a harsh reality. If Augusto didn't find a way to inject capital quickly, the debts could be foreclosed on at any moment. With nowhere to turn, he had a dark idea, although it wasn't exactly illegal, but it bordered on morally unacceptable. He remembered that Lucas was his way to access the human side that aroused empathy in the public and in potential partners. He needed to intensify the strategy. Perhaps Lucas would appear on TV shows, telling the moving story of losing his mother and overcoming it with his devoted father. It was risky, since the child was still very young and could easily let inconvenient truths slip. But for Augusto, it would be a final straw. He then sent for Maria, who appeared at the office slightly nervous. Whenever she was called there was some big problem brewing. Augusto, after wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, got straight to the point. "I'm going to need Lucas to participate in a series of interviews, including on a very popular morning show. You will accompany him, of course, and make sure everything goes smoothly. Understood?" Maria swallowed hard. She tried to argue that the boy wasn't ready for so many cameras, that he was shy and that it wouldn't be good for him. But Augusto interrupted her, raising his voice. "That's not a request, Maria. It's an order. Do I pay your salary or not?" She hesitated, looking at the floor before answering, her voice trembling. "Yes, sir." The fear of losing her job and consequently of being separated from Lucas silenced any indignation at that moment. And in fact, Maria did not know what would become of her and the boy if she were sent away. Lucas would become just another object manipulated by his father. Without her around, who would look after the boy's feelings? So she agreed, holding back her anger and resentment inside her chest. The preparation for the interview was even more torturous than the big event at the mansion. Image consultants surrounded Maria and Lucas, instructing them on what to say and what not to say, how to behave, how to smile at the right moment. Maria hated every second of it. Meanwhile, Lucas seemed confused, feeling the tension in the air, but not really understanding why it was happening. When the day finally arrived, they were driven to a TV studio where a famous presenter was waiting for them for a touching conversation. In the dressing room, Lucas was distractedly playing with a superhero doll while Maria adjusted his outfit. Every now and then, she saw the boy's eyes turn to her with a glint of uncertainty, as if asking for an explanation. She simply ran her hand through his hair in a gesture of silent protection. A little later, the producer announced that they would be on air in a few minutes. Maria felt her heart race. She needed to keep control. If she lost her cool, she could provoke Augusto into even greater fury and, worse, harm Lucas. The time has come. The spotlight was on the presenter, who gave a brief introduction, praising Augusto's kindness and his new foundation to support children. He then called to the stage the great inspiration behind everything, little Lucas, accompanied by Maria, the kind lady who helped him from an early age. Augusto chose not to appear immediately, leaving Lucas and Maria in the spotlight. The presenter, with a paternalistic attitude, began to ask the boy what it was like to live in such a large mansion, how he felt being the son of such a busy man. Lucas responded timidly, uttering a few disjointed sentences, but always looking at Maria for approval or support. She tried to reassure him with her gaze. At a certain point, the presenter asked, "Lucas, do you miss your mommy?" The little boy was silent for a few seconds, somewhat confused. He only knew that his mother had passed away. Maria placed her hand on the boy's shoulder and replied carefully, "He misses you, yes, but he was very young. He barely had the chance to meet you." A murmur of emotion took over the audience, and the presenter tried to explore the drama even further. "And how did it start, Maria? You've been with him since the hospital, haven't you?" Those words felt like a punch in Maria's stomach. Here was the opportunity to tell the truth or keep up the charade. She remembered that she could ruin everything if she revealed how much Augusto had ignored the boy in the beginning. However, her heart was heavy. She felt her throat dry. With a broken voice, she answered, "Yes, I've been with Lucas since his first day of life. His mother was a wonderful person, but unfortunately she left him early. Since then, I've done my best to give him all the love he deserves." The presenter leaned forward as if preparing to extract a confession. "And his father, Mr. Augusto, how was this whole process?" Maria hesitated again. If she told the truth, she would risk everything, including her continued presence in Lucas's life. She decided to protect the boy and, in a way, herself. Mr. Augusto was very shaken at the time, but over time, he got back on his feet to take care of his son in the best way he could. It seemed like a diplomatic answer, but not entirely untrue. The host, realizing that he would not get more than that, called Augusto to the stage, who entered to applause. He kissed Lucas on the forehead in a calculated gesture and sat down next to him, taking the child's hand with unusual closeness. The interview continued, full of questions that praised Augusto's supposed virtues as a father and entrepreneur. He used each answer to talk about his new foundation and the importance of donations. Maria watched with a mixture of relief for not having been forced to reveal anything, and outrage for seeing such a performance. Some people in the audience were really moved. Tears came down some viewers' faces as they watched the story of overcoming of that father and son. And that was the effect Augusto was looking for. At the end of the program, he greeted the host and thanked Maria in front of everyone, even hugging her in public as if she were an honorable foster mother. That scene definitely didn't match the way he treated her away from the cameras, but Maria let herself be carried away by that gesture because she knew that with every display of affection, the world was deceived even more. She felt bad, but if it meant guaranteeing Lucas a safe life, maybe that was the price she had to pay. After that interview, Augusto's image soared in the media, and he managed to attract an investor willing to cover part of the debts on the condition that he expanded the business and involved more social projects. At first, this news should have been good, but it brought another problem. Augusto realized that the more he showed off Lucas and that fake, happy family scene, the more progress he could make in the deals. Maria began to notice a pattern. Whenever Augusto scheduled an important meeting, Lucas was mentioned as part of the equation, as a kind of emotional asset. This hurt the maid's conscience. She felt that little by little the boy was being blatantly exploited. As the weeks went by, Lucas began to show changes in his behavior. Some nights he would wake up crying without knowing why. Other nights he would have nightmares and call out to Maria, asking her not to leave him. The child was forced to attend events or meetings dressed as if he were a trinket. There was no room for him to just be a normal child. Maria tried to compensate by playing with him during her free time, but she noticed that his smile was no longer the same. He would laugh less frequently. Deep down, the child felt the falseness and pressure. One day, as they were leaving a shopping mall where they had bought new clothes for yet another public appearance, Lucas asked Maria with a seriousness unusual for her young age, "Maria, why is my father only affectionate with me when people are watching?" The question sounded like a shattering blow. Maria tried to formulate an answer that wouldn't destroy her father's image, but she also didn't want to lie blatantly. "I think he still doesn't know how to show it when they're alone," she said, trying to sound gentle. "You always know how to take care of me. I wish he was like that too," the boy replied with a sad voice. Maria's heart sank. She had to restrain herself from crying in front of the child. She put her arm around him and continued walking, trying to convey a sense of security that she also lacked. The heavy routine continued until one day, the much-feared crisis reached its peak. Despite the financial boost and Augusto's new image, the debts went beyond control. Pressure from creditors increased. Several lawsuits were filed against the company, and Augusto, finding himself cornered, lost his temper and began to make management mistakes. Meetings became real battlefields. His lawyer suggested that he declare bankruptcy and hand over part of his assets to pay off the debts. Among his assets was the mansion. When the news reached Maria, she worried not only about her own future, but above all about Lucas's. Where were they going? Augusto was becoming increasingly explosive and hostile. One afternoon, he returned from a meeting with a distant look in his eyes, went into Lucas's room, something he rarely did, and stood there, looking at the boy playing with building blocks on the carpet. Lucas looked up and gave a shy smile, but he did not run to hug his father, as would be natural if there were real affection and closeness. Augusto stood there for a few seconds motionless. Then he sighed, turned his back and left without saying anything. Maria watched everything through the crack in the door. She went after him to ask if everything was okay. She found him in the hallway looking more vulnerable than ever. She had the courage to speak. "Mr. Augusto, I don't know exactly what's going on in your head, but if you need anything..." He looked at her with a look of frustration and melancholy, different from his usual coldness. "The worst is going to happen, Maria. I'm going to lose almost everything I've built, and now I realize that I have nothing, not even a son who sees me as a real father." Maria felt a flash of compassion. For years she had harbored a silent anger toward this man who, even though he was absent, was responsible for Lucas's pain. But at that moment, she understood that there was also a human being suffering there, even though he had made many mistakes. She thought about saying something to console him, but she could not find the words to repair the gulf between him and his son. Augusto quickly recovered, muttered something inaudible, and continued on his way. A few days later, what everyone feared happened. The court decision forced Augusto to put the mansion up for sale. The news was reported in the media as a scandal, since the devoted and millionaire father was in the sights of creditors. The press began to question whether all those charity events were nothing more than a facade. The situation became unbearable. For Maria, the uncertainty about Lucas's future was the most pressing issue. She was afraid that, in a twist of fate, Augusto would fire her for good, or worse, decide to get rid of the boy. On the afternoon that the bailiff showed up to inspect the mansion's assets, Maria took Lucas and locked herself in his room, trying to ease the impact. At one point, Augusto's raised voice could be heard arguing with the lawyer. "I'm not going anywhere without my son. I've already lost everything, but I'm not going to lose this too." That was a surprise for Maria. Could it be that Augusto was finally feeling the weight of being without Lucas? A strange tension hung in the air. When everything went silent, Maria gathered up her courage and went downstairs. She found Augusto sitting on the sofa, his head in his hands. The greatness of that man now seemed reduced to dust. Not knowing how to start the conversation, Maria approached. "Mr. Augusto, what did you decide about the mansion?" He raised his tired eyes and looked at her. "We're going to have to leave here. I've been given a deadline to vacate the property. I'm already looking for another place to live. But I need you to keep taking care of Lucas, Maria. He can't be without you." That was unexpected. As much as Maria wanted to protect the boy, the prospect of everyone living under a new roof, starting over, was frightening. She had nowhere to go if she was fired, and she also couldn't bear the idea of losing contact with Lucas. Maybe a new beginning could be a positive thing. Maybe, in a less imposing house, the boy would have more opportunity to get closer to his father and live a normal life. Then Maria nodded. "I'm willing to stay by his side, sir, as long as it's for Lucas's own good." Augusto took a deep breath and gave a hint of a sad smile. It was perhaps the closest thing he had ever shown to gratitude towards Maria. With that, the preparations for the move began. Furniture was auctioned off or sent to a warehouse. Many employees were laid off. Maria and Lucas remained in the mansion until the last day, packing their bags and souvenirs. The boy, confused, asked what was happening. "Are we leaving? But where to?" Maria tried to explain in a simple way. "It's time to live in a smaller place, but where we can be closer to each other. Don't worry, I'll go with you." Deep down, she also wanted to believe that this change would be a chance to build a more human and less theatrical coexistence. Finally, the night before the departure arrived. The huge mansion, once full of parties and flashes, was now silent, with boxes scattered around and empty rooms. Maria finished putting Lucas to sleep. She sat next to him on the bed and stroked his hair. The boy looked into her eyes and asked, "Do you promise you'll never leave me?" The question hurt Maria's soul. During all those years, she had been the only stable presence in the child's life. She held his little hand and answered, "Never, I promise." Lucas smiled and finally fell asleep. Maria went to her temporary room. Hers had already been completely dismantled, and tried to sleep for a few hours. However, insomnia took over her, and she kept remembering everything that had happened since Cecilia's death until that moment. She imagined what the next chapter of this story would be like in a smaller house, with a father who, perhaps, could get closer to his son. At the same time, she feared that Augusto would return to his usual coldness if he recovered his fortune. The next morning, Augusto, Maria, and Lucas left the mansion behind. Their new home was an upper-middle-class house, still comfortable, but much more modest than the luxurious property. Without so many rooms and ostentation, it made it more difficult for a father who did not want to face his son to escape. Once settled there, Augusto insisted on keeping Maria in the house, but dismissed almost all the rest of the staff, claiming that he could not afford so many employees. In practice, he ended up creating an environment where he would be forced to see Lucas more often. There were no long hallways to hide in, nor a distant office to lock himself in all day. In the first few weeks, Augusto tried to re-establish his financial life, working remotely on new projects, always on the phone or computer. Maria took care of everything, from cleaning to meals, while trying to pay attention to Lucas. The boy in turn seemed to adapt well to the change, although he missed some spaces to play. But on the other hand, he had more access to his father, even though Augusto was tense and inexperienced in dealing with family. One late afternoon, Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard laughter coming from the living room. She recognized Lucas's voice and, to her surprise, Augusto's voice. When she peeked through the crack in the door, she found the man sitting on the floor, helping Lucas put together a puzzle. It was a scene she had never seen in the old mansion. The boy excitedly explained how to put the pieces together, and Augusto followed him, sometimes laughing at his own lack of skill. Maria felt her chest warm. It seemed that, under the reduced pressure of a less luxurious, but also less oppressive environment, something genuine was emerging. Watching unnoticed, she saw Augusto look up at Lucas and say, "I'm sorry I didn't spend much time with you before." Lucas, with the innocence of a child, just smiled. "No problem, now we can play, right?" Augusto smiled back, a smile Maria had never seen on his face. That scene was worth all the sacrifices. Although it wasn't a definitive ending, it seemed like the beginning of something new and healthier. Time passed, and Augusto gradually allowed himself to make small gestures of closeness with his son. Sometimes, he would invite Lucas to go for a walk in the neighborhood square. Maria, satisfied, gave him space because she knew that the relationship between them needed intimacy to flourish. However, the ghost of Augusto's debts and professional uncertainty still lingered. While he tried to find a new job or invest in a less risky project, his financial situation was at its limit. Maria noticed that the man was worried, checking bills and making tense phone calls. Then, one sunny morning, a letter arrived that changed the course of history. It was from a lawyer representing Cecilia's family, his late wife, informing that the inheritance that belonged to Lucas through his maternal grandparents could now be accessed if Augusto signed some documents formally acknowledging the division of assets. Those properties, which were located in another region of the country, had never been claimed. For years, Cecilia maintained a good relationship with the family, but Augusto, consumed by grief and his own arrogance, never wanted to maintain contact. Now, what was at stake was Lucas's future. There were considerable resources that belonged to the boy by right. It was a sum that, if well managed, could guarantee his education and stability, without Augusto having to manipulate him as before. However, the clause in the document required that Lucas's official custody be clearly stipulated. If Augusto did not assume formal responsibility or was unfit, his maternal family could claim custody of the boy so that the estate would be administered for his benefit until he came of age. Faced with this possibility, Augusto felt cornered. He was financially fragile and feared that, without his former status, he would be considered unfit by Cecilia's family. He could lose custody of Lucas. It was then that, for the first time, he saw Maria as a real ally and not just a maid. He called her for a serious conversation. "Maria, I need to sign these papers so that Lucas has access to what is rightfully his. But there is a risk that Cecilia's family will question custody and demand the child. I don't want to lose my son, especially now that we are getting closer. I don't know what to do." Maria, after quickly reading the document, was happy to see that Lucas would have a secure financial future. But at the same time, she understood the risk of a dispute. Cecilia's family could claim that Lucas had always been taken care of by Maria and that Augusto was absent, which would not cease to be true for a long time. Still, she did not want to see Lucas taken away from his father, now that she had seen a change in Augusto. Maria's voice was calm. "You need to prove that you are a good father in practice, and admitting that I have helped you up to this point will not make you any less responsible. On the contrary, it shows that you care about the child." Her words rang with reality. Augusto began to consider for the first time that perhaps he could sign an agreement that would make clear Maria's role in Lucas's life, a sort of shared, albeit informal guardian or tutor. That way, he would show the court or whoever it was that Lucas was well cared for and that there was a stable maternal figure in his life. After much thought, Augusto decided to contact Cecilia's family. It was a huge step, since he hadn't spoken to them in years. To his surprise, he found an openness to dialogue. They just wanted to be sure that Lucas was safe and loved. In a video conference, Augusto promised to involve them more in the boy's life, allowing visits and contact. He admitted to them that he had been negligent after his wife's death, but that today he was trying to rebuild everything. Cecilia's family, moved, agreed to transfer the inheritance to Lucas, as long as an agreement was made to guarantee him adequate care. In the document, they included a clause that recognized Maria as a person of reference and trust to take care of the child in case Augusto was not present or able. The millionaire signed without hesitation. He knew that the price of losing Lucas would be too high. When Maria learned the final terms of the agreement, her legs felt weak with emotion. She never dreamed that one day she would receive formal recognition of her role in the life of the boy she had raised with so much love. Although she was not the biological mother, her name was now listed as a secondary guardian, officially registered on paper, albeit in bureaucratic language. It meant that no one could remove her from Lucas's life without legal consequences. With that, the inheritance was released. Augusto, following the lawyer's recommendations, and also Maria's wishes, decided to put the money in a safe fund, which would be gradually used for Lucas's education. There would no longer be any need to turn him into a poster boy to save his father's finances. Finally, Lucas would be just a child. Time passed, and Augusto gradually found new job opportunities. As he no longer had the pressure of carrying a giant company on his shoulders, he opted for more modest investments and began to live a more balanced life. He left ostentation aside, prioritizing being present in his son's life. If before he would wake up at dawn to work in a cold office, now he would share some mornings with Lucas, taking him to school. Maria continued working in the house. A few months passed, and amidst the preparations for their new life abroad, everyday life in the smaller house became increasingly easier. The simple environment helped to strengthen family bonds that previously seemed impossible to create. Lucas grew closer to his father every day, discovering in him a playmate, and even though there were still insecurities, they both now had Maria to mediate the small difficulties of living together. One night, while packing his suitcase for his final trip, Augusto reflected on everything he had left behind. Old photos, documents, and memories reappeared in cardboard boxes. When he realized it, he was not only seeing Cecilia's face again, but also the memories of Lucas's childhood, which he had avoided looking at for years. He stopped before one image in particular. Lucas in Maria's arms, just a few months old, smiling as if there was room for all the comfort in the world in that embrace. At that moment, Augusto realized that the choices he had made in the past, driven by pain and coldness, had imprisoned his heart. But he also understood that it was never too late to rewrite his own destiny. On the morning of the trip, Maria checked everything to make sure nothing was left behind. Documents in order, Lucas's clothes neatly folded, toys sorted. Lucas, excited, jumped through the hallways, eager to see the new country and the adventures he could experience. However, before locking the door for the last time, Maria took a quick look at the house where so many memorable moments had happened. She remembered the early mornings when she would comfort the boy, the quiet conversations in the hallways, and the small daily achievements that transformed everyone. Augusto closed the door carefully, almost in a gesture of reverence. In the car that would take them to the airport, he broke the silence. "Maria, thank you for never giving up on Lucas, and in a way, on me too." She smiled back without saying anything. She knew that this recognition was filled with sincerity that had not existed before. The trip went smoothly, and Lucas watched each different scene through the window, nourishing his childish imagination with the expectation of a new world. When they arrived at their destination, they found a small, cozy apartment, simply furnished, ready to accommodate them. In the first few days, everything was new. The language, the streets, the routine. But for Lucas, just having his father and Maria around was enough to make him feel safe. He soon started classes at a bilingual school, where he was able to make new friends and broaden his horizons. Augusto, in turn, immersed himself in his professional challenges. Although the responsibility was great, this time he had time for family in his schedule. He made sure to return home with time to listen to Lucas's stories, follow his chores, and even teach him to ride a bike on the weekends. With each obstacle that appeared, he remembered how he had almost lost his son. Not through death, but through indifference. And this motivated him to persevere. Maria, adapting to her new address, found her place naturally. She was no longer just a maid. She was a guardian, a friend, a mother at heart. She was able to communicate with her neighbors in any way she could and began to frequent parks and local fairs, sharing smiles with those who did not understand Portuguese very well, but who captured the generosity in her gestures. One afternoon, as they were returning from the market carrying bags, Lucas asked them to stop at a flower stand on the sidewalk. He pointed to a small pot with a sunflower seedling and begged with shining eyes to take it home. Maria laughed approvingly, and Augusto paid for the plant. Once in the apartment, Lucas placed the pot on the windowsill that received the most sun. It was his way of making his home look hopeful and bright. "It's for you, Maria," Lucas said proudly, "because you're like a sunflower, always bringing light to me." Maria was moved. Looking at the boy and his father, she noticed that they both radiated a kind of light that she had never seen before. The desire to be a united family. The past would be marked by mistakes and pain, but the future now was built on the foundations of truth, sincere repentance, and real affection. And so, life went on. There were no more big staged parties or red carpets, just a complicity that had been cultivated through a lot of effort and true affection. The days would still bring challenges, missing Cecilia, the surprises of the new job, Lucas's adjustment at school. But nothing seemed insurmountable. Each dawn was an opportunity to strengthen the bond between father and son, always under Maria's watchful eye. One particularly quiet evening, the three of them sat at the table. Eating a simple dinner that Maria had prepared, they talked about how big the world was and how many adventures they still had ahead of them. Lucas, in the middle of a conversation about cartoons, suddenly blurted out, "I really like living like this. I like having you and Daddy together, Maria. It's like we're a team." Augusto smiled, letting out a grateful look at Maria. And, as the gentle breeze came in through the window, gently swaying the sunflower on the windowsill, Maria felt in her chest that unshakable certainty. She had raised her boss's son as if he were her own, but now they were, in fact, forming a family. And, without needing glamorous parties or rehearsed speeches, they found what everyone, deep down, seeks. The genuine happiness that arises when love overcomes any barrier and renews the hope of a new beginning.